In this video, I want to go over a way that you can bake your high poly sculpt onto a flat plane rather than having to build your retopologized mesh over the surface of your high poly sculpt. Now, the latter is the most common method, and that's because you're typically working with something with real volume in a 3D workspace. In this case, you basically have a single-sided plane. So let's go ahead and take a look at this by going to the Retopo workspace. And I already have a square patch here. I'll hide this layer, and we can go to the Retopo menu, and I want to point out you can click to bring a patch into the scene if you need. This way. Let's scale it down. And then you would hit the enter key, and it's going to ask, do you want to snap this mesh to the underlying voxel object? In this case, I do not. So I'll go ahead and delete that because we already have one here. And you should see your UVs in the UV space. In this case, I need to go up here because this was the UV set for what we just created. But now, after deleting that, I need to go back and choose the default. Now I can see my UVs. So you may want to make sure that you utilize maximum amount of space. That looks good. And I can hold down the control key and click on the island to deselect it. So with this done, let's now go to the Bake menu, and we want to choose Bake with per pixel painting with displacement. So what I'm seeing here is the inner and outer baking cage preview. By default, you'll see something like this. And let me move that out of the way. So when I click on the different previews, you can see the inner shell is the lower one, the outer shell is the upper one. So let's go ahead and adjust our upper shell. And what we want is our outer baking cage to be as close as possible without the high poly sculpt poking through. And we want the very same thing for the inner shell as well. So I'll adjust it. Let's try 50. I can see that I still have some of that poking through. So let's go up to 75. Still some more. Let's try 85. Get just a little bit poking through still. So let's try 87. That's about right. And now let's click inner shell. And let's try 40. And go a little bit further. 45. And that appears like it will work. And so I'll click OK. Now the next dialog that comes up, I'll just stick with the default options here, especially the keep UV. But the one thing I do want to bring to your attention is the don't snap subdivision vertices to the surface. And what that means is if you don't have that checked, 3D Coat's going to try and snap your low poly Retopo mesh to the surface of your high poly sculpt. We don't want that in this case. So let's choose our texture size. You can change your UV name here if you like. I'll hit OK. And let it take a moment to bake. Okay, looks like it's done. So let's go to the Paint workspace. And typically you will see your voxel object taking up the same space as your low poly baked mesh. And to rectify that, we can hide the voxel object here or go to the View menu and uncheck Show Voxels in Paint Room. So now we can see our flat plane. In the 2D texture editor, you'll typically see your color map, but you can select your normals and inspect the normal or displacement map. And you can see The baking result came up well. So with that done, let's see how we can view this displacement in the viewport. Let's go to the View menu and Show Displaced Mesh. If you check that, you'll see it actually displaced here in the viewport. And what that means is, even though we've got this low poly cage, 3D Coat has an underlying copy of this mesh. Now it is using this low polygon mesh because we have not applied any subpatching to this secondary copy that we've got. You don't realize you have it, again, because 3D Coat's not going to show it, but if I increase the subpatch level, now you'll notice I can see a lot more detail being displaced. Okay, again, you have your low poly cage here, and then the high poly version is actually displacing the mesh. So now let's look at our layer panel. If we want to export a simple height map, we can go to the Textures menu under Export, and we'll choose Displacement Map for current layer or visible layers. Zero level gray. And you can choose from the different types here, but you may want to choose 32-bit TIFF. If you choose EXR, that will be 32-bit as well. And if you look in Photoshop, it comes out just like you would expect it to. Okay, so that's a quick look at baking to a flat plane in 3D Coat's retopology workspace. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next video.